Jordan, looking at 2016's results, it was pretty typical of what we've seen out of the Cyclones. 2-7, a bit of a struggle, at least in regards to converting wins in the Big 12. But if you look at the results and watch the team play against, ironically, the upper tier of the league, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Kansas State. They stayed competitive, very competitive in those games, stayed within a score or two in those games based on what we saw last season, based on the recruiting and the other indicators. Cyclone fans pretty happy and pretty hopeful under Matt Campbell?
I think so. I think Matt Campbell came in with a lot of hype. You saw a guy take a Toledo team who had a couple down years and turn them into MAC champions. So I think the good thing about Cyclone fans is they're very patient. They gave a guy like Paul Rhodes 5 or 6 years and had a couple winning seasons toward the beginning of his career, and then a lot of 3-9 seasons. So I think they're optimistically patient is what I can say. But as far as what you saw on the field last year, and Matt Campbell kind of said it going in, he knew there were going to be growing pains as far as holdovers from the previous regime and really getting to learn his players and the system and everything. And I think the big kind of turning point last year for this team was when they played Texas Tech and really throttled them. I mean, it was something that you're watching this offense and it just seemed like everything clicked at that moment and really flat out embarrassed Texas Tech. I feel like Tech was a pretty decent team last year until they played Iowa State, and frankly, I think they just really overlooked the Cyclones. But I think going into this season, 5-7 is probably a realistic expectation, but Iowa State seems to always steal that one game every single year. You go back to 2009 against Oklahoma State when they upset them when the Cowboys were number 2 coming into Ames. So if you look at the schedule, it does set up favorably. Of course, the Cyclones get their in-state rivals, the Iowa Hawkeyes, pretty much right away in the beginning of the season. The Hawkeyes routed the Cyclones last year. I wouldn't be surprised if they could knock off Iowa this year, especially with a new quarterback under center for the Hawkeyes. But I think it's very realistic for Iowa State to go 6-6. I know the goal this year is just for them to make a bowl game. It's been 4 or 5 years since the Cyclones have last made a bowl game.
So long term, what do you think the ceiling is for this program? Not necessarily in one season that could be gaining, catching magic in a bucket, kind of like Kansas did in 2007 when they lost one game and shook up the Big 12. But generally, the ceiling for this program, what can the faithful hope for on a fairly consistent basis?
Personally, not having any investment, just covering this team, I would expect 7-5, 8-4 every year. But Matt Campbell's shooting for the stars. I mean, he has said that he came into Ames to win Big 12 championships. Hasn't really said compete for national championships, but I think a Big 12 championship is enough of a goal for Iowa State. So, to be honest, if you look at his recruiting, who he's brought in and how much he's moved up the recruiting rankings, and rankings can only go so far, but you could see a very likely trend of him going 3-9, 5-7, 7-5, 9-3. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see that within 4 or 5 years, because Campbell mentioned when he came to Ames that he thought this was a place that he could come in and stay long term, not like Gene Chizik when he came in and was gone within 2 years and left for Auburn. So I think Matt Campbell's very invested in this Iowa State program, and he's very honest coach to a fault. He wants to bring in the best players that he can and put in a winning system and really bring winning to Ames that they haven't seen in probably 15 or 20 years, back to the Troy Davis and those glory days. So we'll see what happens. But I know Cyclone fans are very optimistic, and the good thing for a coach like Matt Campbell, they're very patient.